I was supposed to be clearing my head after a board meeting, not diving into a lake, but on the path around Lake Briar. The shout hit like a slap, and everything in me moved before my brain caught up. A little girl was in the water, wrists tied, gag, slipping a pack of boys on the dock, arguing that it was just a prank. And I went in clothes and all cold, biting my ribs, kicking hard until I got an arm around her and hauled her up to light and noise and grass and panic. And when I tore the rope loose and she coughed and blinked at me, she whispered one word that pulled the floor out from under me. Daddy. I told myself it was shock talking a reflex, but I wrapped my shirt around her and rode in the ambulance. And when the medic asked, "Are you family?" my mouth said, "I'll follow, I'll be there." And that was that, at St. Augustine General. The hallways smelled like lemon cleaner and old coffee machines hummed. The nurses moved with that calm you only earn, they told me her bracelet said Zoe, and her allergies were severe. Peanuts and shellfish, 0 mistakes allowed. And I sat in a plastic chair, lake water drying on my pants, feeling like a man who builds towers and somehow forgot where the ground is. I called Ty, my brother-in-law, and the only person who can talk to me straight, and he said a name I hadn't said out loud in years. Elena. My first love, the woman who once told me she was pregnant, and later that the baby hadn't made it a loss. I paved over with work and stubbornness, you know what I mean. And Ty said she's been counting birthdays that never happened. That night, I was in Zoe's room. Lights low, monitors steady, and when I brushed a curl off her forehead, she stirred and said, "Daddy," again, soft, like a memory. And I felt ridiculous and wide open at the same time because she had this little habit of twisting her wrist when she was thinking, a fidget I've had since high school, and I couldn't unsee it. Morning brought questions, Lieutenant Sandoval and Detective Price asking for every detail. My voice flat when I said she didn't fall. She was pushed, and they didn't argue, just told me to keep her close because whoever tied those knots might want to finish what they started. And right then, a social worker walked in with polite words that felt like locks. Temporary placement vetted families protocol. And I said she'll stay with me, and when she said, "Are you related?" I said not officially, but she trusts me, and she said trust isn't legal custody and handed me a checklist like a mountain. We almost made it to lunch before the world reminded us how thin the ice is. Breakfast looked harmless. Oatmeal toast, milk, and 2 bites in Zoe's breathing hitch changed the air rash blooming fast. Her hand at her throat, my shout for a nurse epinephrine. Oxygen-controlled chaos, and I held her hand and told her to stay with me. Because sometimes the only thing a man can lift is his voice. And when her airway opened again, I wanted to cry and fight something at the same time. Yeah, that happened. Dr. Patel pulled me aside later and said, "Her blood type is O negative rare, and sometimes you can learn a lot by comparing markers." And he offered a DNA test without saying the word, and I said, "Do it." And we did the swabs. And Zoe giggled, because I made a dumb face to ease it. And then waiting became a treadmill with no speed button, until Patel handed me an envelope that felt like a live wire, and I read it. Probability of paternity 99, 9%. And I sat down like a building learning gravity all over again. I told Zoe straight, "You asked if you had a dad." "You do, it's me," and she watched my face like a grown-up, and then smiled like she'd been holding that answer in her pocket. I knew it, and something righted itself inside me that I didn't know was crooked. Good news doesn't keep wolves away, though. And that night my rival Clint Mercer called with that smug voice men wear like a suit, he said. "Leave town, drop the stadium bid, walk away if you want. Your little miracle to keep breathing." And I stood at the window with security outside Zoe's door and told him, "You touch her again, and I'll turn over every rock until you live under a prison floor." And he laughed and said, "This isn't about law, Marcus. This is about power, and power is when guys like you finally care about something. And the line went dead, and I stared at the glass like it might answer back. 2 hours later, I heard a door handle click, and I was on my feet before my eyes were open, shadow in the room, masked, moving fast toward the bed. And I hit him. We slammed the wall, security flooding in, Sandoval pulling off the mask to a face I knew from Clint's payroll, and Zoe shaking tiny fingers knotted in my sleeve while I whispered, "You're safe. I've got you like a promise and a prayer braided together." The next afternoon, Elena walked in, and the air changed. Hair pulled back like she got ready in a moving car. Eyes rimmed in red, jaw set. She looked at Zoe and the whole world narrowed to a point, Mommy Zoe said, with this small, brave hope, and Elena folded and gathered her like the word might vanish if she let go. And when she finally looked at me, the years we'd lost were there on both our faces. "They told me she died," she said, voice trembling. I begged to hold her, and they said no, and I heard a name I already didn't like. Rick, the man she dated after me, the man who told her to accept it. And a file from Detective Price slid across a conference room table like a fuse, the death certificate signed by a doctor who resigned 5 weeks later. No autopsy, no chain of custody. A baby turned into paperwork and smoke. And I tapped the table because I needed to hit something that wouldn't bruise. And I said, "Let's draw Clint out. He thinks he owns every room. So we build one he can't see through wire, it bait it, let him hear himself. A shuttered bus depot, concrete that remembers fights, a metal table. A briefcase full of very convincing lies about fraud and kickbacks. Hidden cameras, like stars in the rafters. My heart loud enough to count. And Clint strolling in with that made-for-TV smirk, 2 guards hanging back, because he waved them off like a king. And he said the mighty Marcus Hale playing dress-up, adorable. And I said, "You leave my family alone and disappear, and maybe I don't spend the next 2 years in discovery." And he stepped close enough. I could smell expensive cologne covering cheap fear, and he said, "You think I fear the law?" I had a doctor sign that death certificate. I had nurses move a child like inventory, and he smiled while he said it, and the microphones took every word and saved them. And when the sirens bloomed outside, his smirk finally cracked. Sandoval's voice bounced off concrete. "Clint Mercer, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, attempted murder." And the cuffs went on, and he still tried to look immortal. "This isn't over," he hissed, and I told him, "You just fell." Court is theater with sharper teeth. Defense claiming the recordings were doctored. The DA biased me, vengeful. But when Clint's own voice filled that room, you could feel a verdict forming. And when the jury said guilty on all counts, Elena squeezed my arm so hard my fingers tingled, and Clint smiled that arsonist smile on his way out, like he was already lighting a match in his head. And I let him go because the tape and the bars and the paper all said enough for once. Look, I wish I could tell you that's where the credits rolled, but life doesn't do bows on cue a week later. A letter showed up with a photo of the old chief of medicine on some beach with a drink wearing a tiny umbrella. No return address, block letters on the back. Some men retire, some run. And we handed it to the prosecutor, and she said, "Federal will love this." And that night I checked the doors, checked the pantry labels like a man possessed, and stood at Zoe's doorway and let the truth land. Justice is real and also slippery. Here's what I know. When Zoe called me daddy by the water, I became a different kind of strong, not the tower building kind, the show up and stay kind, the keep EpiPens lined up like little soldiers kind, the I'll sleep in a hospital chair 3 nights, because leaving feels like betrayal kind. I've been told by men with soft hands that family is a liability, and if that's weakness, then put it on my business card. I'll take the kind of weak that tucks a child in and checks the air filters twice. Zoe likes to say, I'm strong like a lion, which is funny if you've ever heard me lift a box and make a dad noise, but she's not wrong. I'll be a wall when the wind comes, a door you can't pick. And if power is Clint's favorite game, then love is the rule he never learned. It doesn't make you softer, it makes you relentless. If you're still with me, do me a favor. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, sure, but tell me what you think justice should look like when one man gets a sentence and another sips a coconut on a beach, when a hospital pen becomes a weapon, when boys learn that cruelty is a joke until it isn't. Tell me if I was right to bait a confession, or if that crosses your line, push back, argue, share the time you were underestimated, and stood up anyway, like the video. If this hit home, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love isn't soft when it refuses to quit and subscribe, because we've got more truth to tell, and some of it might be yours.